So sustainability is vital for future, but young blood is too. That's why the next debate is all about the voice of the future. The younger generation might be a bit more reckless because of their lack of experience, maybe, but they tend to have a different and maybe even a more positive view on the challenges they experience. Anja Aronowski-Kronberg will moderate the debate. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of Vestoy, the online platform aiming to reinvent fashion editorials by publishing critical sartorial pieces with an academic character. And it's a forum for critical thinking on fashion and is intended to question and reflect on why we wear what we wear. First participant is young designer Rushemy Botter. He studied at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, where he met his mentors Walter van Berendonck and Dirk van Zanen. He already won a few prizes, nice prizes. The V-Files Runway 7 last year being probably the biggest one because it allowed him to be present at the New York Fashion Week. For his master collection, Botter received the Dries van Noten Award that reflects most passion for fashion, the BVBA 32 Anne Mullenmeester Award for most promising collection, and the Knack Weekend Award for most promising designer. So sound promising for a debate too. Second participant is Astrid Regout, CEO of the Belgian prêt-à-porter brand Blanche, a company she knows really, really well because her mother founded it. 2 years ago, she took on the task of transforming the family business into a modern company while keeping the brand DNA intact. Now she runs Rue Blanche together with her sister. And then we have Aya Noël. She's the third participant. She studied comparative literature at the Université Paris-Sorbonne and also fashion journalism at Central St. Martin's in London. Her final thesis focused on the way sustainability is communicated through fashion media, and she's currently working as the online editor of One Granary, a platform founded by the students of Central St. Martin's. Very curious what the voice of the future will bring us, so your applause please for Anja Aronowski-Kronberg, Rushemy Botter, Astrid Regout and Aya Noël.
So I figured before we properly get started with the following debate, I wanted just to preface a little bit so that you know which aspect of this voice of the future that we'll be focusing on for the next 40 minutes. So my three panelists, Aya, Rushemy and Astrid, they're all pretty recent graduates. And I mean, I graduated, I think it must have been probably 15 or so years ago now. But I still remember very well this, the moment of the years that follow leaving university as a really particular point in time in my development as a professional, of course, but as a human being also. And I think part of that has to do very much with going from a space that is very much focused on concept, which universities are, theory, principles, and then what you do with all of that once you actually go into working life. What principles you manage to hang on to, which ones you find you need to compromise with, and what propels you to make those choices. So I want the moment that we have on the stage here to be a bit more personal perhaps than what the talks leading up to now have been, because we won't really be talking about our respective jobs so much as talking just about our experience, or your experience in particular. You know, what have these, I mean, Astrid, you graduated a bit 6 years ago now. Rushemy and Aya, you're very recent, only earlier this year, no? So we have different perspectives a bit. So to start with, I figured it would help you if you got to know Aya, Rushemy and Astrid a little bit better, which I have had the pleasure of doing already. And I thought just to know, so for everyone in the audience to know where you're coming from, I would like for you to share just what got you into fashion in the first place, because everybody has that story, like, why fashion?
Yeah.
What about you, Aya?
I really only have one reason to be in fashion, which is my mother. She owns a shop here in Belgium, so I could choose to either let her work and stay upstairs or join her in the shop and join her in Paris. I had a very hard childhood. So I always went to her, I joined her everywhere in her work, and so my first experience was really this dreamlike experience of the Devil Wears Prada moments and theatricalities and beauty. So thinking about principles, I think that was really my journey of seeing the behind the scenes and understanding what goes on behind the beauty.
But then you decided to focus on writing rather than retailing.
I think I purposely chose to study literature because I think that if you come into fashion with only knowledge about fashion, you won't be able to bring anything interesting. But then I was drawn back in, and yes, I write because that's what I'm best at.
What about you, Rushemy? Do you come from a fashion background as well?
No, not really. I started before this a year architecture, and before that I grew up in an environment where we used to be every boy is tough, So, and I was drawn to fashion, to these beautiful gowns, to these beautiful clothing, to this also like reading these magazines and hiding that I love fashion, because when I was young it was like no fashion, only soccer, those kind of things. So I went to the store and secretly looking into these fashion magazines, those kind of things.
Secretly?
Yeah, secretly, because it was like when I was with the boys outside, it was not tough to say I love fashion, when I was younger. So it was secretly, and later on I saw that you can also like follow education for that, so I straightly went for it.
How did you even discover that there was such a thing as education for fashion if it was far from the background you came from?
There was also in a magazine I read an interview of Walter and
Walter van Beirendonck.
Yeah, Walter van Beirendonck, and then that's when I read there was education. He followed the education here in Antwerp as well. So for that was my really that was a really goal for me to go to this education, to get accepted here. And when I got accepted, it was like a dream come true.
And Astrid, you also come from a fashion background, so
Yes.
your entry is a little different.
My mom founded Rue Blanche, so I was always born with it. The brand is 30 years, I'm 30 years, so I was always with it. But it was never my plan to be in the fashion world. It's just more that it's a world that I knew, so I did most of my internship in it. But then I had one time where I was like, okay, I'll try something completely different to see if I want to do something else, because I know it's a very tough industry. And in the end, I was sucked back into it. you can't get away from it. It's like
no, I wanted to ask
into
also, if the three of you, if you were actively encouraged, I mean, maybe for Aya and Astrid, I mean, coming from families that were already involved in fashion, I mean, were you actively encouraged to go into the industry as well, or rather the opposite, where your respective mothers were like, you should get another? Yeah.
For my mother, it was never like, you have to go into the fashion industry. It was more about, do whatever you want, try it. But she was also very much about, come and see what I do, and because you always need to be very curious about what you do and to be curious about things. So she would always take us to the office, and we would just, for us, it was just pure pleasure. You have like carton and like colors everywhere, so it's just like about like do whatever you want everywhere. But it was never like you have to take back the family business. It was not at all into my mind when I actually took over the brand. So it's, I don't know if you had the pressure, but
no, never. But and I think a lot of people who work in fashion can recognize it. It was never a question, really. It was just, it made me so excited that I didn't even wonder like, oh, I can decide not to work in fashion, or...
I understand you. That's exactly how I feel.
But what
It's
about
like natural.
what about the boys that you felt you had to hide your magazines from, your friends,
Now
when
I'm
you?
proud, they are proud, you know, but it's different now. Now it's like cool to be into fashion, and back in the days it was like, it's also cool to do ballet as a boy, you know. But back then it was totally different. But yeah, they're proud, and I'm also proud.
But it's true that fashion education has had a huge upswing. I mean, I work at the university in London, the London College of Fashion, and there's like a ginormous plethora of different aspects of fashion that you can study today that certainly weren't part of the landscape when I started studying like 2 decades ago. So it's true that fashion has become maybe part of the entertainment industry, and it's you have books about fashion, documentaries about fashion, films about fashion, so many magazines. So I guess it's entered public consciousness in a different way, no?
Yeah, and you have all these like rappers making fashion. Everybody has a fashion line or fashion clothing line now. So it's like everybody wants to do that and think it's easy to do it.
Why do you think that fashion education or fashion has become popular in that way?
I think because people can profit of it.
You mean financial profit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think so. Because I'm sometimes envious of the generation that came before us, where if you read the backstories of even, especially in Belgium, even the most well-placed designers, it's always kind of, oh, I liked fashion, I hung around with these Antwerp students, and then I started working, and now I'm the creative director of makeup at Dior.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
And I think we are a generation that fashion is so open and so popular, and so many people want to be a part of it, that you can just wanting to be part of fashion doesn't grant you access anymore. You need to get that access otherwise, and very often you need to pay for it through education.
You mean pay in actual money to a
yes.
school, or
Yes.
pay in time, or pay in...
Yeah, or pay through labor and intern for 5 years for
Internships
free.
and those kind of stuff. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, internships is something else that's become almost an inevitable, or like a kind of extension of education, right? You have all done them, no? Internships in different ways.
Yeah.
Yes,
I know
of
you've
course.
interned in my apartment in Paris, so... But internships, I mean, we were talking a little bit about that this morning. It's a kind of contested part also of fashion, because a lot of companies profit from free labor that comes through internships, right? And I remember when I was a student, there was already a lot of, the vibe among the other students, like, should you do an internship? How much should you work for free? What's the company? What can they ask from you? When can you say no? Are those things that you also felt when you started doing internships?
Yeah, like I started to do an internship in fashion while I was actually studying marketing, where marketing in a general sense, every time, like, I was even asking my teacher, like, but how does that work in fashion? They were like, but fashion is the exception. So I was like, okay, but how do I find out how marketing actually works in a fashion company? So I had to work for one of those companies. And at first, when you work as an intern, you feel completely used, and you're like, okay, I'm not paid for this, and I'm doing over hours, and why am I actually doing this? But in my case, it's thanks to the 2 internships that I did that I managed to find the work that I did after. It's in one of those internships that I got a contact that got me my first job, and it's thanks to that other job that I got another job. So it's, I think internships are really important because you get the contact, you have this opportunity to actually also see what's happening in the different companies, so you can learn from
how the different companies are working, and this will help you later on into your work. And this is knowledge that you will never get as soon as you work. You're like, oh, but how does it work in that company? You're like, oh, I wish I was an intern again to just go back and like kind of see, oh, okay, this is how they do. And then you kind of want to go back, but it's impossible as soon as you start to work.
But did you also feel, I mean, or do any of you have experiences of feeling taken advantage of when you were doing internships? And if that was the case, like how do you say no? How do you learn that?
For me, I did an internship before I got into this fashion academy, but it was an internship at a Dutch designer, local designer, but in a small group, and I was really feeling part of the team, and our heads were all the same way, you know. So for me, it was not. I didn't feel like they were taking advantage of me because I really wanted it as well. We had the same goal, and it was so small. I could do anything there. Not just only making patterns or just doing this or that. It was doing everything, and we wanted all the same thing. So for me, it wasn't. I didn't feel that way.
Did you ever have a negative experience, Aya? Think careful.
I have to be careful with what I say because I have one of my bosses, a second boss who I interned for free, sitting right there. So, but honestly, I was doing work that I technically should have been paid for, and that is the way our economy is structured and the way fashion companies are structured. So that's not towards you as individuals. But so I think that whenever you are doing a free internship, you have to make sure to get as much out of it as you can. And I was lucky to work with bosses who were able to give me knowledge and opportunities in exchange. So,
but then when you eventually, I mean, when the three of you eventually graduated from internships to jobs, did you find that your employers were looking at where you had interned? Did those things ever come up in interviews, or were you asked questions about...
I didn't hear the question because of the...
Were the names of the internships important on your CV?
I think that's important. Also, it's for me. I started the company right after my graduation, but I think it's important in fashion that you worked with this person or with that person. I was taught here. I went to school here. That's also important. The awards that I won, that's also important. It's a bit of name dropping, I think, but I think it's important that you get this recognition of the people that are already somebody in fashion.
Yeah. So this element of name dropping, is it something you found has been actually useful? So, this morning we heard that, self-promotion and name dropping is a bit of a taboo in this industry. How do you negotiate, the smooth name drop?
That's what I always thought, that like name dropping would help, but in the end I'm like, I'm not here because I name dropped this. I think it's more about the relationship that you've done with the people that are at that work, that in the end got you the job, because you might have been working in the best company ever, but if you're a pain in the ass, they're still not going to take you. So it's all about, if you manage to get that key relationship in this company, no matter where it is, just start small if that's important. But that small step is going to get you to a bigger step. But for me, just no, name dropping didn't help me, and I even did studies where I was like, oh, this is going to help me in big companies, and I'm like, no. It did not, so I don't think it's key. But at least from a business side, I don't think that's really important.
Yeah, I understand what she's saying, but for me, the name dropping was like when we got off. I graduated, got the awards, and right after that, with award money, we started. We rented a showroom in Paris during Paris Fashion Week, and we didn't know any buyers. Nobody helped us. We had to do it on our own. So we made these flyers, said a little introduction about who we are, and of course we dropped a few names that we won the Dries van Noten award, that award. And we went to the shows of Dries van Noten and on the Medemest Award and started flyering the shows to the buyers. and that helped us because we got a few buyers that came in and a few cool stores that placed orders. So that was, for me, that kind of name dropping went really well, you know.
Which names did you drop?
From the awards, like Dries van Houten, Anne Meulemeester.
What about now that looking back a little bit at your education, is there anything that you wish you would have learned or something you wish you would have been taught but you weren't? What about you, Aya?
A lot. I was really disappointed with my education, at Central St. Martin's, the Master in Fashion Journalism, because they didn't expect you to critique the system at all. And I think that's a choice every educator has to make. Do I prepare my students to fit perfectly into the system they're about to enter, or do I prepare them to critique the system they're about to enter? And at my school, you know, they really wanted to assure that students would have a job once they came out, and so we learned how to write perfect copy without flaw. But I really expected there to be more.
But how could they have taught you that? How could they have taught you to challenge?
I think you can teach somebody to question. You taught me to question everything you do and why are you doing it. And you know, nobody needs somebody to describe clothes anymore. We can all see the catwalk shows 10 minutes after they're done. It's not going to help the world to have a perfect description of that outfit. But you know, we didn't have a single lesson on where are clothes produced and where do they come from and where do they go. And also as a journalist, you have a responsibility you have a power to influence the people who read what you write. So then I think we should use that power, at least be aware of the power we have. And then you can still choose to describe clothes.
But Astrid, what about you? Because you come from a business background, so different to Rushemy and Aya, who studied something creative. Is there something that you think you wish you would have been part of your
studying
education?
in marketing, it was a lot about always like talking about the big companies. So it's like L'Oreal, Procter & Gamble, and like it's all like this is where you're heading at and this is where you have to go. And the thing is that if you apply for these companies and you actually fail, then you're like, okay, but if it doesn't work, like where do I go? So it's actually, what I disliked was that they gave us these companies as the only option, but there's so many other companies where, even smaller companies, where you could actually learn much more than if you were in one of these big companies. So I would have wished that maybe a teacher was like just saying like, look around you, look in the city where you are, just talk with the industry, come to conferences like here today, just like try to get contacts instead of just going like to speed dating with like companies and getting business cards where you get through a whole process and it's just a computer that's like discarding you because you haven't done something properly or you don't have the right grades. And I think judging people by the grades is not always what is important, because the human side is super important. Like maybe someone might be less good at something, but if they're really good at something else, then it's with that person that you want to work. There's like some top students and they're completely asocial people. And you're like, okay, good on paper, but dealing with like normal, you're like, can you please talk normal? Or it's like... So I think there's this kind of like lobby sometimes of the schools about these are the companies where you need to go work for. And you're like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to do more smaller things, and that nobody tells you. So.
Is it the same, Rushemy, at the academy here, where you have like a kind of pecking order of the companies that are the most popular or most status-filled to go into? And
it's more that the students that already graduated, that are working for these big companies, everybody looks at them and you see like Demna for Balenciaga, Vetements. Those are things you look up to. You know, you also want that. That's a dream. That's what everybody wants. That's why we start doing fashion. So I think, yeah, you go automatically. You go to that, to Raf Simons. You aim for that. That's what you want. Those
like
are,
success in terms of working for a big house or having an established name or getting a lot of press attention, the kind of almost outwards signifiers of...
Yes, that's what gives you also a good feeling that you are working there. If you're working there, it gives you a good feeling, you know? You're working with the best, you're working there, everybody looks up to them, so...
So if that's how success is still defined in a way quite conventional terms, I guess, even for people studying fashion today, when you have all these other options, if that's success, what do you think of as failure? Like, did people talk about that, your fellow design peers, Rushemy? Like, if success is, let's say, to become Demna Vasalia's assistant at Balenciaga, what's failure for someone coming from fashion school here?
I think that's personal. For everybody, it's something different. But for me, failure is when I'm sitting at home, I can't do what I want, and you're trying to get into these jobs and interning. But I mean, interning after intern after intern after intern. And for me, because everybody's also like looking, what is he doing now? What are you doing? You know, and you can say that it's not like that, but for me it is like that, because you stay in contact with people and you ask, what are you doing now? You're trying to be friendly, but you also want to know, you know, and everybody wants to know. It's like, yeah, we can say like it's not like that, but it is like that.
I would love somebody at a party like, hey, what you doing? Oh, you know, watching Netflix, masturbating, not
up.
much.
Yeah, it's fucked up. I'm doing
like,
I'm doing nothing now.
Looking for a job.
But everybody's like covering it a bit. And
what about, Aya, when it comes to fashion journalism and writing, is it still do people still want to go into the mainstream titles or have independent titles, or doing your own thing online become an alternative success?
No, I was surprised by how many of my peers really wanted to go for those big names. And
what are the big names then for a journalist?
So Vogue is still considered, you know, being the editor of Vogue was considered the goal. And even though there's a relaunch of independent magazines, this isn't really considered a status position at all. Even if they might have more influence. Yeah.
And for someone coming out of business school, how does fashion rank for a graduate from Handelshögskolan in Stockholm, for instance? Is it sort of seen as glamorous or a bit...
But I still see it as very glamorous, because I got to see it like from behind the scene with my mother, and I knew that you have fashion and you have fashion. Like, I knew that you have the fashion shows, but you also have the smaller companies. So I knew that if I wanted to go into fashion, it would be with more smaller companies where you have this more humane relationships. Haven't worked for any like big fashion companies, so I wouldn't know how that works there. But I prefer companies that are a bit more like entrepreneurships, and because it feels very like everybody's part of a project. But from business, I don't have a lot of friends that are actually working in the fashion industry now. No, I was more like the exception from the group there. So it was always annoying the marketing teacher with my questions, where he's like.
I started out saying to the audience and that we would talk about principles, and we already started a little bit to explore this topic earlier. I remember, and if I reflect on my own journey into going from being a student to being a professional, I think this is something that has been a constant questioning for me. What are my principles? How willing am I, or how far am I willing to compromise? What does a compromise mean? Like when I first graduated, I had a certain idea in mind of what it would mean to first work for, to have a boss and work for another title, then eventually to set my own thing up. And I remember thinking, I will for sure never compromise on this, and then as time has gone on, I found it so curious that some things I thought were important have become less so. Other things have become more important, and I have realities to deal with that I never thought I would as a student. Financial realities, for certain, and also the realities of suddenly feeling like you're in an industry where you have something to lose. You become somebody, and with that becoming of somebody, you have to present a certain face or a certain image, and since the three of you are still, I think, negotiating this, like going from theory to practice, I'm curious to hear if you have principles first that you feel, I can compromise on everything. As our speaker said this morning, I can compromise on everything except this. What about you, Astrid? Do you have something like that?
It's a good question. Like for me, it was more about, not related to studies, but I was always like, I always want to live abroad, up until the time where I actually had a job opportunity in Belgium. I was like, why does it have to be in Belgium? But in the end, this is the job that I really wanted to do, and I was like, I'll live abroad in another life, or like it will come later. So it's just, I think I can't really say like what are the things that I really want to have, but I do trust what life has in front of you, just that things happen for a reason, and just give it a little bit of a chance and let it go. It will be fine in the end. So it's only afterwards that you will connect the dot that you're like, this is why it happened, and now I understand. But
what about you, Aya?
Yeah.
I know you to be a pretty principled person.
I came out of journalism school with a lot of principle. Or like, I'll never sell out to the brands. But the truth is that as a fashion journalist, you need access to the industry to be able to work, and that access is often granted to you by brands. So I haven't compromised yet. Although I was once offered a pair of shoes by a designer I interviewed. So I already...
Did you take them? Did you take the shoes?
Yes, but we sold them to pay for something else. We sold them on eBay to pay for a shoot. So I'll tell you after. But yeah, so, and it'll probably happen again. But something I never want to compromise, or I would never do, is judge women by how they look. I don't think any people, and especially women, owe it to anyone to be pretty. And I think fashion journalism can strangely twist into a rating of how good somebody looks, especially around award season. And so writing about this woman is too fat to wear this, or this woman doesn't look good, I think I would hope for this type of writing to die tomorrow, because...
What about you, Rushemy? Do you have any principles as a designer just starting up that you feel are particularly important?
For me, it was like I will never go to making commercial clothes, those kind of things. But I see now fashion is also business. I have to make money to keep the company going. So I try to find a good balance between creativity and commercial kind of clothes. But for me, it's also like when a buyer comes to me and he only wants to buy the t-shirts and hoodies and sweaters, for me now personally I would say no, but I don't know how it goes when he's coming with a good offer, you know. But for me that's a principle kind of thing, like I would say no, because he also has to buy the creative kind of creative items that I'm also making. That's what the brand is. But I'm saying now no, but
how
you know?
much? How can you actually negotiate those things as a designer? If somebody comes to you and says, "I want to buy 500 caps that say Botter on them,"
Yeah.
for instance, and how can you say no? Like, how do you, if you want them also to buy something that is, the outfit that you feel you've put the most creative energy into, how do you speak with the buyer to make them also buy the thing that they hadn't come in thinking they would want?
I want them to not only buy the items, also to buy our world. Everything that we are communicating, everything that we are making, I want them to buy that. Not only like the item, like the caps, just to sell. Yeah, I have to sell, of course. But for me, the ideal thing is also to sell what we are making, our world.
And when it comes, because I had an interesting conversation just recently with two American designers called, their brand is called Eckhaus Latta, and they've been around for probably 7-8 years, something like that. New York based, part of the kind of cool crowd still in New York. And they were telling me, on this topic of principles, or what does selling out mean, that they also had this dichotomy between commercial and creative or conceptual. And for them, negotiating logos was something really tricky. Like at the beginning, they were getting the advice, why don't you make logo t-shirts? Why don't you make some money, capitalize on what you've built up? And they were resisting and resisting. And then they were like, hell, let's just try it. And then it did become a bestseller, which then allowed them to invest back into the company.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, how do you relate to logos versus, how is making a logo, is it ever selling out, or can you make a logo?
For me, it's not. For me, it's not. I never wear, now the cap, of course. But mostly the clothes that I wear, they never have logos. But for me, now that I'm making clothes, it's important also to have branding. It's, especially in this kind of time, it's really important. So you can say it's selling out, or it's the other way around. You could say it's a bit naive if you don't think it's it's not important, because it is important, I think.
I wonder if, as we're winding down, if I could ask you to reflect a little bit on what you find. I mean, each of you guys told me what brought you to the fashion industry in the first place. But I wonder, now that you have all been working in it for a little while, what aspect of it do you find the most appealing? Like, when things are annoying and frustrating and you have to make compromises that maybe you don't want to, what is it that keeps you in the industry? What is it that makes you stay anyway?
I think that no matter how mainstream some parts of fashion can get, I do always feel like there's an acceptance to weirdness that you don't have in any other industry. And I'm always appreciative of that. I was the girl with half-shaven heads and a completely fur coat coming to school, or a top hat, and which in high school didn't really work. But here it does. I'm really thankful for that. People like it and applaud it. So that part, yeah.
What about you, Astrid?
For me, it's to dress out, to have a certain attitude when you go out, and like to be able to express yourself. It's like you will never put the same clothes one day or another, depending like how you feel. And I think it's I like it because it's an extension of who you are, and people will never stop communicating about themselves, and so that's why I really like it. It's all about communication, communicating with people and communicating with yourself, and it's all, yeah.
yeah, for me it's the same, that everybody can be himself or herself. And especially in our, I saw it for the first time in our school, academy, that so many diversity, so many international people, and everybody was being themselves and got accepted for who they are, and you could dress up the way you want. You can, a boy can come in a dress, you can be just yourself, and nobody's like looking weird or something, and I love that feeling, you know. I'm dressed up like really boring all the time, but I always love to see the people like dressing up and just be themselves and like really being happy.
But it's like, because you've all, I mean, now you're all talking about kind of self-expression in fashion, and it's something I remember very well also from being at university, because it's really this kind of hotbed for experiments and trying different styles. And but have you found the same freedom in working life? Do you think you can hold on to that? Experimentation, or even if you work in, you know, an office at Procter & Gamble, for example, or, you know, whatever it.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's what I was going to say. I think if you look at fashion from the outside, just looking at magazine covers, it looks like there's only space for skinny white girls. And then, you know, the truth of the schools is that there's so much diversity and so much going on. So yeah, I would love to find a way to bring that to the industry, to mainstream parts of fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree, totally agree.
Yeah, so
Good
let's go more. Let's bring some.
That's a rallying cry.
Yeah.
All right, so how to bring weirdness back into mainstream fashion.
But not just weirdness for being weird, you know, just for, you know, just be yourself, and you can be different, you know, but really different. But I see it myself sometimes, I like, when I come in an environment and I want to dress like something like really, maybe a yellow jacket, and I see like, oh, maybe not here, you know. I see them myself, I like dressing down also, and I'm from a small village, and when I wear these short pants, everybody's like looking weird in the shop, like, what are you wearing? So I'm now used to it, but in the beginning I was like wearing normal pants when I go to the shop, you know, because every time the same things, they say the same, every time the same things, oh, you like cold, or this and that, but...
With that, that's the end of our session. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
And we each have a job to do, no? Thank you.